in the meetings I've had with senior FDA officials, including the commissioner, always try to end it with, what can we do to help you? And this is one thing that they have come back to us repeatedly over the last couple of months. They need more resources. They can access those resources if sequestration could be changed. So I think this is critically important. So when we think about actionable items that we can ask the Congress to act on here that will affect the community and help facilitate drug development, I think this is one very important one. And the whole concept of sequestration, we all understand the constraints of federal government spending and the limitations that need to be put in place and better discipline. But this is one that makes no sense. If we ran our companies and looked at all of our programs from the riskiest to the most secure and the ones that make the most sense, and we said, well, we got to spend less money, so let's cut them all across the board. You just don't do that. If we did that, we'd be fired. We probably should be fired. So when we think about what can we do, there are much bigger fiscal issues that we will never solve in this room. But there is one very specific to our community, and that's advocating for this piece of the bill. It's not asking for more money. It's asking just for release of private funds that are essentially being given voluntarily to the FDA to make this a better system. So I think that's a very good piece of legislation.
Well, just to emphasize that point, there's a paradox, because the FDA has in fact made important new regulations, such as breakthrough designation, as a way to move programs forward in a more expedited or accelerated manner. And yet, so companies are flocking to it. They're using breakthrough, and I think 25 or more companies have received breakthrough designation. That means more time spent on those particular applications. This comes at a time where sequestration is limiting the amount of time and the number of reviewers that are going to be available. So this is one time where the FDAs, or the good guys, are caught in between. They're really trying to do the right thing, and they're really not going to be able to get their resources that they need to do this if this sequestration continues.
Thank you, Patrick. We have about 8 or 10 minutes left. I'd like to ask the panelists a couple of questions. Tracy, you gave such a powerful statement of your experience, and when I began talking about us being at a crossroads, the reason we're not past this inflection point is because there are still so many programs and families still in severe crisis, and yours is one of them. When it comes back, you gave the quintessential model for how medicines are supposed to be developed, all the pieces of this virtuous circle that come together to make it happen, and then all of a sudden you've got this distinction between the US and Europe, and just, as a public policy person, but as a human being, you just scratch your head and you ask why. And in my experience, when that happens and the FDA doesn't allow something to move forward, but Europe does, or sometimes the other way, more often not, it's because there's a discrepancy in the view of a preclinical package, animal studies, or discrepancy in the view of how the clinical protocol should be run. I don't know if you should or can provide any insight, but that might be helpful for people in the audience to understand where is the disconnect, and how might some of the legislation that we're talking about here, or even just the change in leadership or perspectives, make a difference. So I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, John. As you mentioned, early on after Noah's diagnosis, we got in touch with people who had been successful in driving therapies for rare diseases. We took their model, and we were one of the lucky rare disease groups in that we were able to execute each of those steps, or in the process of executing each of those steps. And to be there at the 11th hour and have this yanked out from under us is just incomprehensible. I do believe it is due to a disparity in animal model safety protocols that differ between here and Europe. I can't go into a lot of detail, but that is my limited understanding.
One of the issues that raises, then, whatever the technical issues may be, clearly it rose to a level that it was sufficient in Europe to put this into children. And I'm guessing that they took into account what is the alternative. And as a dad, knowing that there may be significant risks based on some animal data that without commenting on the specific data, given where you are, where your son and daughter are, how do you assess as a parent the risk-benefit ratio?
So I believe this is also part of the, I'm not sure if it was Section 901 of FDASIA, but part of the legislation that was written into the FAST, which became part of FDASIA, emphasizes to have more family input in rationalizing the risk-benefit ratio. And I think that's an important step for parents to be involved with. Excluding parents from that discussion just doesn't make any sense, or excluding patients from it. We are the ones who are either dying or watching our children die. And for us to be excluded when their lives are on the line, when they have no other alternatives, we deserve a seat at the table.
You absolutely do. I know they've made some effort, and the commissioner in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other areas has gone to great lengths to include patients, but it's inconsistent. And I think that's something that needs to change. I think the point that you bring up is a good one too, that it is never going to be black and white. We can draw up all the legislation we want, but ultimately it's going to come down to judgment. And it's not the judgment of the FDA commissioner or Dr. Woodcock, it's going to be the judgment of the reviewers in the division. And most of them are terrific people, and they want to work with us, but they don't have the guidelines. And they also don't necessarily always have the right mindset, I find. And when they're trying to balance safety and efficacy perspectives, that risk-benefit, they don't get it right a lot of times. And that's really frustrating, that level of inconsistency. You may well be in, I don't know if you're in neuro or what division of FDA, other lysosomal disorders are in GI, other rare diseases are in derm, oncology. There is very much a disparate set of views across those organizations. And that's something that needs to be fixed as well. And I think when we think about the work ahead of us, it's so important because we're constantly going to be revisiting these issues. There's always, if it gets dramatically better in Batten's, there's going to be another disease where it's not, and they're going to be in crisis. And it is likely to be case by case. We do need better guidelines so there can be more uniformity, a change of culture and understanding at FDA, but also people need to be held accountable at every level. And I think that's something that the Congress can certainly do.
And John, some of these issues are so intertwined. As I mentioned in my talk, I've heard this story over and over again. We have a researcher at a university here in the United States who, I believe it was about 9 years ago, took a data package for a gene therapy he was developing for, I believe it was ALD, may have been MLD, took it to the FDA. The reviewer at FDA rejected it. Our researcher got the paper back and looked it over and said clearly the FDA reviewer did not have the correct expertise to understand what they were looking at. So we tried time and time again to go back to the reviewer and eventually got shut down. 9 months later, the data package was in France, and the clinical trial successfully proceeded in France. And this goes to some of the sequestration money that we talked about as well. If this money gets shut off, FDA is making efforts to hire and bring on specialty reviewers because they saw this as a problem. But if these monies aren't available to bring in these specialists or hire new people into the field that understand the problems specific to rare diseases, where the biology is understood but it's complicated, then we're going to continue to see this problem.
I agree. Having that level of expertise throughout FDA, those subject matter experts, is critical. But that, again, has to be linked with direction from above and throughout the FDA that in areas like rare diseases especially, we need to take risks and we need to encourage innovation. And that has yet to be filtered through the FDA. I think that's very clear. Miriam, you had mentioned that Alpha-1 is somewhat fortunate in that there is an approved therapy with the plasma-derived protein products, but they are not a cure. Even being plasma-derived, there's all kinds of complexities. Do you get the sense in working with regulators that they're holding you to an even higher standard because in their mind there is a cure or a treatment already?
Yes, absolutely. and I think that there have been delays in the development of inhaled therapies that the Alpha-1 Foundation did not anticipate. I think that in the draft guidance, the fact that they indicate that they'd like to see the leadership move forward down to the level of the reviewers, I think is very positive, though. I think that one of the problems that we have, as you've illustrated here, is that when we get together with the FDA, we have a high-level meeting with them. They're willing to solve problems and be flexible, and yet when we get down to the review level, that doesn't always translate into action.
I've had the same personal experience. I could tell you in the Pompe world, it's been since the spring of 2006 that an enzyme therapy has been approved for the treatment, not the cure, the treatment of people with Pompe to varying degrees of success. It is not a cure. It is a first treatment. For some patients, it is not effective at all. It's a good first step, but it's certainly not the answer. And I get very frustrated when I hear people outside and inside the FDA say, well, Pompe already has a cure or a treatment. There is so much more that needs to be done. And it will be maybe not within any of our lifetimes till there are really true cures for many, many of these diseases. It's these incremental but important and meaningful steps forward. So this whole notion that, well, unmet medical need is in areas where there is no treatment, that's true, but that shouldn't exclude areas where there is a treatment but no cure. Until we have a cure, we're not there. So I think this has been a good discussion. We're just at our hour now. These have all been important examples of experience in the field, important ideas and suggestions that we need to now work, I think, starting with the Congressman's comments, specifically getting support around the letter that's being circulated. The goal is obviously to have as many co-sponsors of that legislation as we can, and I think through our grassroots network, hopefully we can do that as well. So we've moved from crisis to crossroads, but still, again, an enormous amount of work to do. In my opening comments, I shared my experience with those families with EB and first having met them. And I really haven't heard much of EB, which is epidermolysis bullosa, which is why they call it EB. And I got a call just a couple of weeks ago from some folks I know. They had just received some venture capital funding, a treatment being developed, a topical cream that in an investigator-initiated study of 8 patients looked to be very, very promising in people even with the most severe form of EB. And they asked if I'd consider providing some counsel on drug development and helping them. And I also learned that it was one of the very first companies to receive the breakthrough therapy designation from FDA. So talk about taking it full circle in just those couple of years. In just these last 2 weeks, learning about this company, the treatment, unbelievably exciting that there can actually be an effective treatment now for many people who suffer with this awful, awful disease. And I met with the founders a couple of days ago. I said, great, you've got breakthrough therapy designation. What's that going to do for you? And they looked at me and they said, we don't know. We're hopeful it's going to do a lot, but we don't know. So they're at a crossroads. So I think that's emblematic of the whole industry and the whole field. So we've put in place a lot of great tools, and we've started to change the discussion. We've brought people like the Congressman and many other members of the House and the Senate to the leadership that needs to take place here if we're really going to make a difference. So I hope we can have many more of these briefings. We've got some work immediately in front of us, but much work that we don't yet even see. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Shire, a great company in the rare diseases, for sponsoring this. Thank you, Julia, for your efforts in RDLA as well. So onward. Thank you.